Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Walking Down the Warwick Road, the podcast where we look back at various events from United's glorious history. A landmark episode, if you will, in episode 20, and we have a special one for you, which we'll get to shortly, folks. I'm Tim. Joining me, as always, is Pete Molyneux, Roger Gardner, and Roy Kavanagh. How you doing, lads?
All good. All good.
Very good, thanks, Tim.
Excellent.
Like we said off the top, a magnificent episode today. Roy and Pete, you were there live to witness, what we're going to talk about today. Roger, obviously, you've supported United since the 70s, so a terrific cross-section of United support to take us through what is a terrific topic. And Pete, if you wouldn't mind, set the scene for us.
Well, in setting the scene, around about 1986, I think it was, when United had gone 2 decades without winning the league, a singer called Brian Walsh, I'm not sure if it was a Manchester lad or an Irish lad, recorded a song called Song for Sir Matt. And it was a Pogue-style, high-speed Irish rock song which celebrated United's rise to glory in the 20-odd years after World War II. And you'll be pleased to know I'm not going to sing it to you, but allow me to just quote a couple of verses, which will lead us nicely into tonight's topic. So the song went, I remember the team of my youth, when United are the greatest was the truth, with fire in their bellies and passion in their hearts, in the spirit of the Busby babes, each player played his part. They rose up from the tragedy of Munich 58. The incomparable Matt Busby built a team of all-time greats, with a Scotsman brought from Italy and a balding Geordie lad, and an Irishman who danced the field like Nureyev gone mad. So let me just repeat that slowly. A Scotsman brought from Italy and a balding Geordie lad, and an Irishman who danced the field like Nureyev gone mad. It's superb poetry. The Scotsman is Dennis Law, the Englishman is Bobby Charlton, and the Irishman is Georgie Best. For those that don't know who Nureyev was, for those football fans that don't follow ballet very closely, he was the greatest male ballet dancer of the time, and he used to pirouette around the stage with magical feet, and that's how Brian Walsh compared Best to. They're immortalised in Manchester United's golden history as the Holy Trinity, or the United Trinity. And on the 18th of January 2024, it marks the 60th anniversary of that trio coming together. And in this podcast, we want to look back at how it all began, what brought that trio together to United in the 60s, and why their legacy is as strong as ever. So, Roy, just paint a picture for us. Where did United stand in August 63? Describe the landscape for us, Roy.
Well, it actually was a very optimistic time because of the previous May, we'd won the FA Cup for the first time since 1948, beat Leicester 3-1 at Wembley. There was real signs of recovery from the Munich air disaster. They had senior players in the side, Harry Gregg, of course, Billy Foulkes, Bobby Charlton, Dennis Violet, Albert Quicksaw, and younger players that had come through after Munich, Shea Brennan, Nobby Stiles, Johnny Giles, and Busby had integrated expensive signings. I just mentioned Quicksaw, he came in 58, and he seemed to bring one in a year, Busby. He brought Setters in 59, Noel Campbell came in 60, David Hurd came in 61. So by the time we got to the first league game against Sheffield Wednesday, there was optimism about. I was 16, and in the end I would go to every single home match that season, and I went to quite a lot of the away games as well. Great hopes were that we could go on and win the league and get us back into the European Cup, because that was the main aim of the club, even though that season we would be in the Cup Winners' Cup.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So, Pete, Roy touched on it there, the optimism heading into that 63-64 season. How did the first half of the season go?
Well, it didn't start off well, Tim. We got a 4-0 hammering at Everton in the Charity Shield, but then we went undefeated in the opening 7 league games and sat top of the table with 22 goals scored, so over 3 goals a game. Busby had given some of the youngsters a chance, Chisnell, Sadler and Moyer, but in that 7th match of the season, he handed a debut to 17-year-old George Best, who had a decent match in United's 1-0 victory, but Law didn't play that day and Best went straight back into the reserves. Despite a couple of league setbacks, United still led the table by mid-October, and they'd won 8 and drawn 3 of the 13 fixtures. But 1 win and 4 defeats in the next 6 games stunted the title challenge, and we slipped down to 6th place. We won the next 3 league games, but in the run-up to Christmas, crucially, Christmas 63, United suffered 2 heavy defeats again. 4-0 once more at Everton in the league, then a thumping 6-1 loss at Burnley on Boxing Day. And United's crippling inconsistency had returned. Worse still, Dennis Law, the top scorer, had got a ban, a 4-week ban, I think, 28-day ban, after being sent off at Villa. Busby made rapid and drastic changes. For the return match with Burnley 2 days later at Old Trafford, he moved Bobby Charlton from the left wing to centre. More crucially, he played 2 young wingers, 16-year-old Willie Anderson on the right and George Best on the left. The results were instant. United won 5-1. Best scored the 3rd goal, and he was in the team to stay. I mean, he'd played 10 days earlier, he'd played in the Youth Cup match against Barrow and starred in a 14-1 victory. 14-1. Law missed the Burnley fixture at Old Trafford, and he missed the FA Cup win at Southampton in early 64 because of his suspension. But he was back for the 2-1 home defeat to Birmingham on the 11th of Jan. But Bobby Charlton missed that game with a chest injury. So at this stage, Charlton, Best and Law had never played together in United's first 11. But on Saturday, the 18th of January 1964, in United's league match at West Brom, the lineup contained for the first time what legend would call or come to name the Holy Trinity. Now, Roger, we don't have a detailed report from that match against West Brom, but give us the bare bones of the facts of that historic fixture.
Well, for the Anoraks amongst us, it was match day 33. United went to the Hawthorns looking for their first win there, actually, since 1959. Albion were 8th in the table and United was 6th. Though it should be noted, Albion had the upper hand against United at the Hawthorns. Albion had won 2 cups in the 60s, but this was their side in transition. They got their record signing John Kay up front. He cost $55,000. You may also remember Don Howe. He was playing one of his last games, fullback for Albion before he went off to Arsenal. But it was the United lineup that was much more noticeable that afternoon. It lined up Gaskill, Dunn, Cadwell, Crerand, Folks, setters against his former club, Hurd, Graham Moore in his only season for United, Charlton, Law and Best. There was no lottery in 1964, but the key numbers there were 9, 10 and 11, the first outing for the Holy Trinity of Charlton, Law and Best. They all scored, along with Terry Simpson for Albion, who I'm sure went around telling all his friends that he scored on this day too. But David Hurd would argue that he was actually the star of the day, with 3 assists for Charlton and Law. George Best's inclusion, though, was a surprise. It was only his 3rd appearance, but he did make the Albion team sheet in the programme. David Meek, in United review against Arsenal, wrote, "The 4-1 win last Saturday was full of promise. It was the first time Law and Charlton had played together in the Spearhead, and the combination of these 2 internationals could bring the side a lot of goals." And he certainly wasn't wrong. A crowd of 25,000 witnessed it, and I'm sure they never forgot it.
Absolutely. And of course, nobody knew at the time what impact those 3 players would have on Busby's side over the next 6 years, Roy. But do you remember the match or have any reaction to it?
I do actually, because I'm not a fair weather fan, and I've been to quite a lot of away matches besides every home game that season. But the defeat the week before to Birmingham by 2-1 at home was a surprise and a disappointment. And I must admit, don't forget this is now 1964, we were into the swinging 60s. And I decided, I'm not going to go to West Brom. I'm going to go to the cup tie against Bristol Rovers and whatever. And I'll go out with my mates and save me money and go out with my mates that Saturday night, which was made much happier by us winning 4-1 at West Brom.
Can you we're focusing on that West Brom match, Roy, was Bess when they all played together, and Bess was the final piece of that jigsaw. But there seems to be some significance from what I've learned, because I wasn't there. It was about a year before I started going. But Charlton had played mainly on the left wing, and he was moved to the centre. And Meek reports on that him and Law seemed to team up. And so almost a striker as we know it. Did that cause any surprise when you ran out for your football pink before you went on your Saturday night out?
Not really, because I must admit, Charlton, having seen him since his debut, when he started off as a tearaway centre forward, I always liked him more as an inside forward, as a provider, because he had so much skill. And it made sense that, the young Best was going to be playing on the wing to release Bobby inside.
Right, no, good. Okay, well, although we didn't win a trophy that season, Roy, I guess United fans had seen glimpses of what the side could do. What's your recollections of that second half of the season then? Obviously, you didn't know instantaneously that the match you'd missed was of such historic value, but how did we go on after that? And what impact did it have on the fans, would you say, that second half of 63-64?
Well, I think there was a real fillip to the fans, because I went to virtually every game after the West Brom match. And they were playing such exciting football, really. The biggest problem was that the success they were having was causing problems, because they were having so many fixtures. In the league, in the end, they just missed out. There was a pivotal defeat at Anfield. Around Easter, we got beat 3-0. But we were in the FA Cup, defending the FA Cup. And there was one very famous tie in the 6th round against Sunderland, which I still regard is probably as good an FA Cup trilogy that United's ever had in the FA Cup. We drew 3-3 at home, 2-2 away, then won the decider 5-1. And quickly, that was on a Monday night. On the Saturday, we had to play the semi-final at Sheffield Wednesday, which should never have been played. It was an absolute disgrace of a pitch. Fairness, same for both sides. And West Ham beat us 3-1. So we were out of the cup. And the following Wednesday, we had to go to Lisbon to play the second leg of the quarter-final against Sporting in the Cup Winners' Cup. Well, now we had a lead of 4-1, and hopes were high that we can move through this competition. But we got absolutely hammered 5-0. And a couple of the players who I've met in preceding years said that they never saw Busby more annoyed than he was that night in Lisbon. And it's still United's record defeat in Europe, by the way, 5-0. But we finished second, and we got to the semi-final of the FA Cup. We got to the quarter-final of the Cup Winners' Cup. And, of course, the emergence of George, really, because Dennis was world-class by then. Bobby was world-class by then. But the emergence of George was absolutely phenomenal. It wasn't, he didn't get the feeling it was here today, gone tomorrow. He settled in brilliantly. Always a slight worry about his lack of weight, but he was perfect. But the main man that year was Dennis Law, with a club record number of 46 goals in the 42 games that he played, missing so many with his suspension, how many he would have finished up with. But even though it was trophyless for the club, but Dennis won the Ballon d'Or, the first Manchester United footballer to do so.
Oh, Roy, that was brilliant. And of course, we've only got you to bear witness to this coming together of the great three and the impact on that season. Tim didn't see it, Roger didn't see it, and I missed it by a year. But it sounds like it obviously turned things around after Christmas, because we were 6 when we went to West Brom, I think Roger said, and we ended up coming second to Liverpool. I think from what I can remember, because I was following it in my bedroom, all this stuff when I was only 9. And we went to Anfield near the end of the season, and if they hadn't beaten us 3-0, we'd have still had we might have nicked the title. The FA Cup, as you say, went out for the semi-final for the 3rd year running. Yeah, and we won't mention the Cup Winners' Cup again. That was dreadful. But it sounded like some of that daring-do football was coming in, and we saw more of it in the next few years. Okay, lads, I guess what we should look at now is what happened in the seasons that followed that, because that was the halcyon seasons of United in the 60s. Tim, do you want to take it away with the next season, 64-65?
Yeah, absolutely. So heading into that season, Busby added John Connolly, a right winger. He'd won the league at Burnley 4 years earlier, and all bolstered an already magnificent forward line, which now included Connolly, Hurd, Charlton, Law, and Best. And it was a fearsome force between 1964 to 1966. That season, United were in a close race for the title with Chelsea and Leeds. It was close throughout the 64-65 season. And in the end, United were champions by the slightest of margins. United's 6th title overall, and the first just 5 years after, obviously, the United's darkest hour, the tragedy at Munich. We were on course for the English double, plus the Inner City's Ferris Cup, but lost at the semi-final stage in both cup competitions. Law, again, top scorer, 39 goals and 52 appearances. Hurd followed with 28 and 55 appearances. Connolly, 20 and 60 appearances. And Charlton, 18 goals and 59 appearances. And, of course, Busby, 14 goals and 59 appearances. Nobody counted assists in those days, but these 5 players made a lot of goals for one another throughout the campaign, and especially Busby with his wing play. They scored in the league that season. That forward line scored 89 goals. And when you think of all of the great teams and all of the great players that Sir Alex had at his disposal through his reign, for people like myself who didn't see this group play together, these five attacking players, 89 goals, as I said, in the league for them. And the only team to score more than them since then is the 99-2000 team, which scored 97 goals in the league. So wow. Just an incredible goal haul for that forward line from 64-65.
You know, you can get bogged down with stats, but going back to that 1964-5 season, which was an incredible season, 10 players played 55 or more of the 60 games. And Dennis Law would have been with them, but he got suspended and missed 4 to 5 games. And of course, that in the end was the key when you finished up playing Ferencváros away twice in the beginning of June in the semi-final. And we got to semi-final of the FA Cup. But an incredible stat that is.
Indeed, an incredible season all around. And for those who want more information on that incredible season, you can watch or listen to our podcast that we did on the 1964-65 season.
It was an incredible forward line that had goals in it, and of course it was part of Matt Busby, as he was then, philosophy of going forward, playing attacking football, entertaining the crowds and winning, of course. But Law there, 39 again, you say, Tim, in that season, on top of his 46 the season before. I'm trying to do the maths, but that's it, 80 goals in 2 seasons. It's just incredible. And it carried on from there. We go into 65-66 season. The league title win meant United were back in the European Cup for the first time since April 58. Now, that meant a lot to United supporters because of what had happened at Munich. There was no doubt at that stage in 65, it had become the holy grail for the manager, for the club, for the players, for the supporters. And so we were glad to have a crack at being in the European Cup again. Only the champions went in, of course, in those days from each country, plus the winners. So apologies for the constant reference to Munich and using that as a line, but it did quietly drive the club on in that it wasn't discussed much, but it drove us on to that holy grail. But United got through the early rounds okay, and in the quarter-final, they were drawn against the mighty Benfica. Now, they've not been as good in recent times, but in the 60s, the Eagles of Lisbon had appeared in 4 of the previous 5 European Cup finals, winning 2 and losing 2. United had edged a 3-2 victory at Old Trafford, but Benfica had never lost a home game to foreign opposition. Busby's firm advice before kick-off in the Stadium of Light was to play it really tight for 20 minutes with a view to not giving Benfica an early goal and hopefully quieten the crowd down a bit. But we, Georgie Best, had other ideas. By the 13th minute, it scored twice. A beautifully placed header, then a burst of speed through the home defence. And Benfica couldn't believe it. We couldn't believe it watching at home on grainy black and white pictures. 3 minutes later, Canelli put us 3-0 up. And in the end, United cantered to a 5-1 away win. And there's no exaggeration here when I say it took the football world by storm, that victory and the manner of the victory. And particularly, it brought the world's attention to 19-year-old Georgie Best. And with his long dark hair, the press dubbed him the fifth Beatle. When he returned to Manchester Airport from Lisbon, he was wearing a sombrero that he probably bought at the outgoing souvenir shop. But the photo was on the front page of all the newspapers with the title El Beatle. And our George was now the property of the football world and the world at large. People that didn't give a toss about football wanted to know who this George Best were, whether a male or female. So we were chasing again the league, the FA Cup and Europe. But like Roy said about the previous two seasons, we got bogged down in April. The Football League wouldn't let you cancel matches. So we ended up in April 1966. We played 9 matches in 24 days, including 3 semi-finals. The goal scoring dried up at a vital time. Bestie got injured, a cartilage injury, and we finished 4th. Went out to Everton in the FA Cup and to Partizan Belgrade in the semi-finals. That was probably United's best team in the 60s on its day. And probably as well as Bestie being a high-profile star, the unsung hero was Bobby Charlton. And he got that recognition that he deserved in winning the Ballon d'Or, so United's second Ballon d'Or in 3 seasons, and English Football of the Year. So again, we didn't win anything, but we were entertaining, and the 3, Best, Law and Charlton, were really contributing. Roger, do you want to tell us about 66, 67?
I do, yeah. So picture the scene. Really, English football was at the pinnacle. You know, we just the World Cup. Sir Bobby Charlton and Nobby Stiles were raring to go just 3 weeks later at Old Trafford. I'm just going to run through some of the big headlines from this season, really. I think what struck me looking at the squad, you had to be English, Irish or Scottish to get into the United team. No foreigners whatsoever. Best and Charlton played every league game. Dennis Law scored 25 goals in all competitions. Again, David Hurd knocked in 18. United were top scorers with 84 goals. And actually, as well, the lower number of games actually helped United because they were thrashed at Blackpool in the League Cup, and then they had an early exit in the FA Cup, going out in the 4th round against Norwich in front of over 60,000 at Old Trafford. From then on, really, it was the league or nothing. So really, there was no excuse for United not to become consistent. In fact, really did become consistent because they only lost 2 games after October in the league. They had a very decent run in as well. March to May, they only had to face Liverpool from the top 6. And probably the most memorable afternoon of that 66-67 season was that 6-1 romp at Upton Park when United just blew West Ham United away. And it was fitting that Best, Law and Charlton all scored to beat West Ham. It was Nottingham Forest who we edged into 2nd place, and they did so on goal average against Spurs. But those glorious scenes of seeing that famous football trophy around the perimeter of the Old Trafford pitch, and I think as a supporter of younger years, you would never have guessed that we would have to wait so long for another title, 26 years from 1967.
No, thanks for that, Rog. And of course, that gave United another crack at the European Cup. Roy, tell us what your memories are of 67, 68. We'll come back to what happened in the League Cup perhaps at the end, but tell us about 67, 68 in your own words.
I thought in 67-8, United played some some marvellous football. The whole team had matured, had gelled into a team unit with the excellence of Best Law and Charlton. But, as Pete just mentioned there about the 65-6 season, one of United's greatest sides, really. But 67-8, and they genuinely were looking forward for the European Cup this year. Because, again, Pete had mentioned earlier, whilst Munich as a word wasn't bandied around, everybody knew that that's the trophy that United really, really wanted. And as I say, they had, if you just put the European Cup at one side at the minute, they had real chances in the league. By the middle end of March, they were deservedly top of the first division, and looked as though they would go on and win the league. But that's when the European Cup came in and sort of settled which way they were going to play. They'd had a relatively easy start against the Malta side, Hibernians, winning 4-0 in Manchester. But then having to play on a fully sand pitch in good heat, hot days in Malta, produced a surprising 0-0 draw, which then took us to Eastern Europe, to Sarajevo, to play the Yugoslav champions. And, they got a very, very good 0-0 draw, despite having horrific travel difficulties for the game. And I remember being at the second leg. Were you there, Pete, against Sarajevo?
Yes,
in
Old
60,
Trafford, yeah.
Yeah. And there was something about the night. It was an edgy evening, and it was quite a vicious game, really. The Yugoslavian team gave some real stick out to United, and United went 2-0 up, and with a 0-0 draw, looked reasonably comfortable to go through. And then suddenly Sarajevo scored a goal, and it suddenly hit everyone in the crowd. This was the first year that away goals would count double. So you're going, hang on, 2-1, 8 minutes or so to go. If they get another one here, they're going to go straight through. No extra time, I don't think, and certainly no third game. But we held on, but it was quite a vicious game, which gave us another trip into Eastern Europe, this time to Poland to play Gornik. And a marvellous game in Manchester where we beat a very good side 2-0, which was very important because the away leg was played in atrocious conditions, and a huge crowd of, they reckon 100,000 in the stadium, completely uncovered. And there were fires being set around the ground to keep people warm. Busby actually was unsure whether he wanted the game to go ahead because of the snow. But Pat Creran says to him, well, it's going to be the same for both sides, boss, and we're 2-0 up. So, they're not going to suddenly become supermen and we're not. And he felt that the snow might lie a little bit high on the goal lines and make the goal difference a bit shorter. That's probably a typical Pat Curran story. But we lost 1-0, but we got through, and that showed a real fighting spirit in the side. And then, of course, the glamour draw of Real Madrid, when George really confirmed his superlatives by scoring a beautiful goal. Then he's played in the game, but he took another knock, and that would become crucial for him in missing the final. But of course, first we had to go to Madrid with a 1-0 lead. And when we were 3-1 down at half time, it wasn't looking good. But Busby again used his managerial skills by just calmly saying to the team, I was told, look, guys, it's 3-1 tonight, but the score is now 3-2. We only need one more goal, because that away goal difference that we were talking about with the Sarajevo game would have come into it. But we went even better, of course, and we scored 2 goals. And when you look back at how Billy Foulkes somehow just casually wandered into the penalty box, George wheeled the ball across him and he just glided it into the corner. And you think, wow, should he be playing centre forward these days? But yeah, a great victory, and of course gave the club the chance of that holy grail of lifting the European Cup, played at Wembley 10 years after the crash.
Yeah, thanks, Roy. That was brilliant. And of course, that was our first European Cup final. The first time an English club had appeared in the European Cup final. Other teams had got to the final and won the other European competitions, but the one that was really revered around Europe, the European Cup, that was our first stab at it. Of course, what was we put the really big team out in '60 in the semi-final and beating Real Madrid. They'd won it 6 times by then, I think, Real. So we thought we were over a big hurdle there. But then there was Benfica facing us. And Benfica were obviously still a very good club. They would want revenge for that 5-1 hiding at home 2 years earlier. And they had something like, they'd had 7 of their players in the '66 World Cup squad in England. So they were a very, very strong team, a very good team. And one of the things I remember particularly about that, one was I got a ticket with my dad, and then some MP stood up in the House of Commons and said children shouldn't be allowed to have a day off school to go and see a football match. Some major general wrote in and agreed. And all of a sudden, the headmasters around the country said people can't go and have a day off school just to go to the final. In my little life then at 13, it was like the Suez Crisis. It was a disaster. Anyway, common sense broke out somewhere along the way. I think they said they were worried about mass truancy, but they said in the end, certainly at our school, if you had a ticket and your father or your mother wrote in saying you'd got a ticket, you could be allowed a day off and they won't mark you absent. And thank God that's what happened. And I went. Boiling hot day, absolutely boiling hot day, went down there. Lots of United must have got about 70,000 tickets in the end. The rest went around the country, and those people that weren't United fans supported United. I think Benfica had about 5,000 to 10,000 fans, if that. But the override thing was a Wembley full of 90,000 people cheering Manchester United on, and it was superb. Obviously, the game always speaks for itself. Benfica toughened it up. They didn't play attractive football. They got stuck in a little bit. They tried to stop Busby a few times. But Charlton put us ahead with a glancing header around about the 60th minute, if I remember, just after the start of the second half. And then Jamie Grather scored near the end to equalise. They could have won it with that great shot, great save actually from Stepney, from Eusebio. And it went into extra time. Do you want to take us through the extra time bit, Roy?
Yeah, the sight of both sides sitting down, the impetus then was with Benfica because we had the Stepney save as well, and they looked strong. But we got the reserves that we needed, and Alex big kick down the field, nodded on, and there was Best. And absolute genius, just the way he caressed the ball and went round the goalkeeper and put it into the net. And then Kiddo on his 19th birthday, I think it was, got the third goal. And then Charlton, fittingly rounded it off. And for Bobby and Billy Folks, and of course Matt and Jimmy Murphy, we mustn't forget Jimmy. Those 4 in particular, that night must have been so emotional, really, because they'd been there and were affected by what had happened 10 years, as the others had knew about it. Nobby was on the ground staff. But to win the European Cup, and really, I can't get over now. I mean, Samat, I think, should have gone after that, but we were there. The Holy Trinity won the Holy Grail, and it was so sad that Dennis had to miss the final because of his injury.
You touched on the emotion there, Roy. One thing that specifically stood out for me, so I've been following United for 4 years then, 5 years if you include the youth team, was so all I knew was the excitement of my team being the champions of Europe, that chant that went round that night and for years after, we never missed an opportunity to sing champions of Europe. But my team had won the league twice and won the European Cup. First English team to win the European Cup. That was another song. But for me, it's just the joy of that. When I looked around me at the end of the match and the players were walking around the pitch and they got the European Cup, there were older people around me in tears. And at first I thought they were just very happy as well. But I got separated from my dad a little bit, and he came 10 rows down the terraces and joined up with me as they went round with the cup. And he says, no, these lads are crying because they remember that these people had watched the Busby Babes and saw what they started in '56 and what they were dreadfully stopped doing or trying to do in '58. And that hadn't clicked, but from that moment on, it stuck with me how much it meant rather than just reading it about it in a book, And just the scenes that went on that night, probably emulated in '99 as well. That for 20 or 30 minutes afterwards, the singing of Champions of Europe and the players in front of the United end with that in their all blue kit with that massive European Cup, it just felt like we climbed to the Everest of football. And Bestie was the star on that night. He was the star of that season, whereas Law early on had been scoring all those goals, that vast number of goals. Bestie was top scorer in 67, 68, I think, Roy. Yeah. Scored some belting goals, some important goals. And Charlton got 2 on that night. So although Law wasn't there, and it was very sad that Dennis missed that with his knee injury, but 2/3 of the Holy Trinity took us right to the pinnacle, And really, in a way, we should in a way end the story there, because in a way, very sadly, Georgie Best was 21 when he won that European Cup. He also won the Ballon d'Or that season, and he won the English Footballer of the Year. So Manchester United had 3 Ballon d'Or winners in the same team at the same time. I don't think any other team has had that. I'm happy to be proven wrong and have a 50p bet, but I don't believe 3 players, the same team, have played together and won the Ballon d'Or. But sadly, that was the height of George's career. It was the best Manchester United were going to do of that 60s side, even though we went on to play in the World Club Championship the following season. We were cheated out of it. I'm happy to say that and be sued by Estudiantes by a poor refereeing decision. We lost on 2 legs. We lost to AC Milan in the semi-final of the European Cup when we were trying to retain the European Cup. Again, we were cheating out of a goal that was over the line at home in the second leg that would have given us the equaliser. Matt Busby had decided to retire and went that in the end of that season, 68-69. Best, Law and Charlton would play on at United until 73, and they would still perform brilliantly in many games, collectively and individually. But it was never quite the same after Sir Matt finished in 69 in that May. And United won't win a trophy from 1968 till 77. Worse still, of course, in 74, this great club was relegated. But those golden years from 63 to 69 raised Manchester United, I think, to a worldwide level. The crash had something to do with that. The winning the European Cup and coming back from the disaster, rising from the ashes and winning it. But we did it with flair and entertainment, and the jewel in the crown was that Holy Trinity. Best, Law and Charlton's final fling was in a 4-1 home defeat to Spurs on the 28th of October 1972. I was there and it was dreadful, and it was really turning bad under O'Farrell. He went a couple of months later, and we were at our lowest then. In the October before that, in 71, Huddersfield, that was the last time all 3 scored in the same game in a 3-0 win. So they'd all scored in the first game they played together, and the last time they all scored in the game was October 71. To commemorate the success of Best, Law and Charlton, United unveiled a statue outside Old Trafford in 2008 on the 29th of May, exactly 40 years to the day that the club had lifted the first of our 3 European Cups. So there we are. That's the Holy Trinity, the United Trinity, and their contribution to United's great history. The burning question, I guess, is Manchester United's history is littered with great players, brilliant players, exciting players. Why is it we've only got 1 statue to 3 players? Why haven't we got a statue to Ronaldo, Tevez, and Rooney, or a number of other players that could have played in the 48, 58, 77, 80s, 90s teams? Why have we made the statue for Best, Law and Charlton? Why were they so special? Why does their legacy remain? Dennis Law, in fact, has got 2 trophies, if you count 2 statues, if you count the one at the Stretford end. So, Tim, start us off. Why do you think the legacy has endured? What was so special about those players, individually or collectively?
Well, I think I think the start. Roy, we've all touched on it. You had 3 Ballon d'Or winners in one side, first and foremost, and to win a Ballon d'Or, obviously we know the type of season that players have to have in order to win that trophy. 1,632 appearances collectively, 665 goals collectively for them. A European Cup, 2 Division 1 titles, an FA Cup, just tremendous, statistics. But then when you look at them as players, they just mesh together beautifully. The power of Bobby Charlton, his ability to strike a ball, just absolutely incredible. The finesse of George Best, and I think what gets lost on a lot of people is the amount that George Best got kicked. You hear about some of his battles with Ron Chopper Harris when he went up against those tremendous lead sides as well. He was getting absolutely battered and still putting out those performances week to week. And of course, Dennis Law, we've touched on his goal tallies and the seasons that he put together for United. His underrated, in my opinion, ability in the air. But I'm sure Roy and Pete can add more to that when we get to them. So just 3 tremendous footballers, but also you look at what they did and what they accomplished for the club at a time when tragedy struck with Munich. And like you said, Pete, we apologize for harping on it, but it was really the symmetry and the synergy between the 3 of them, the old with the new, to complete the journey that started for United in chasing the European Cup. We looked at the 67-68 season when we won the European Cup, but goals from George Best, goals from Bobby Charlton in the final. It was that meshing of the old with the new and completing that journey. And I think that's what makes it so special, is it really is a story of perseverance. And whether United's your football club or not, in football and sport, it really is a romantic story to see them finish off what was started after such a tremendous tragedy. And for those players, those 3 players, to be at the front, the tip of the sword and to spear that success is just, I think that's what it means. And it's why I'm wearing, George Best shirt today, the 68, the replica of the European Cup shirt. Why I've got Bobby Charlton's shirt on the name and number on the 2008 shirt behind me. Bobby Charlton, for me personally, Bobby Charlton was my dad's favorite player. And so, everywhere you go in the world, whether a United fan, if you traveled in and around that time, it didn't matter where you went. Bobby Charlton, George Best, Dennis Law were household names. And you could, as a United fan, you could travel and say those names to people that you were traveling to worldwide, and they know those names. And I just think that's there's just a special aura about those 3 players. It really is.
Well, thanks very much, Tim. And Roger, anything you can add to that or give your views on why you think the legacy shines so bright?
I couldn't contradict anything that Tim has said there. I think the 3 of them are part of Manchester United's DNA. Talking about Mourinho or Dave Sexton or O'Farrell, people that came to Old Trafford and struggled, what they were actually trying to do was recreate what had gone on before. And what I mean by that was the quality, the excitement. So, I've been supporting United since '76, and the dot came quite close to making exciting to me. But when I was reading my football books, at the age of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I was reading about Bobby Charlton and what he did for England. Bobby Charlton won the World Cup with England. They wouldn't have got to the final without, to Bobby Charlton. People like Ron Atkinson that were managing at West Brom when Manchester United came, he wrote in his programme notes, "It's so good to welcome Manchester United to the Hawthorns today. because we know what they stand for in world football. So those three players actually put Manchester United on the map. And I've got one other slightly funny story. I was covering a United semi-final at Aston Villa, and I got my equipment sat up at the back of the press box, and I said to the friend I was with, "That guy down there, is that George Best?" And he looked and said, "Yeah, I think it is." Now, I'm quite a shy person, so anyway, I clambered across everybody in the press box, went down 5 or 6 rows of seats, messed up everybody's wiring, and I get to within 10 yards of this bloke, and it wasn't George Best. I'm actually I'm actually stood looking at him, and he's looking at me. It was from the Daily Express, thinking, "What on earth do you want?" And I went, "Oh, sorry, it's nothing." And I made my way back up to the back of the press box and had made myself really unpopular because I'd messed everybody about. But George Best was probably the only person that I would have done that for, because I actually thought at that point I'll probably not get another opportunity in my life to meet George Best, and sadly it didn't happen. My ex-wife, was lucky enough to meet Dennis Law when she was working, and I said to her, "When you meet Dennis Law tonight, tell him that he's really a really special guy and I love him lots." And she said that to Dennis Law, and Dennis Law turned around to her and said, "I take it your husband's a United fan then." So anyway, they're my stories. So I think, if you took George Best, Sir Bobby Charlton and Dennis Law out of Manchester United, it would be like dropping 3 letters out of Manchester United's name, and it just wouldn't be the same club for me.
No, that's excellent. So Roy, you and I have covered a bit about what we saw, but what's your view on why the legacy endures? You can go back as far as the early 50s and see the Busby Babes and everything since, and you will have grown up probably reading about the 48 team. Why Best, Law and Charlton up there? No one's suggesting for a minute they don't deserve it. Why is that a legacy endured so long?
Well, there's a combination of things, Pete. I mean, obviously Munich is for someone like myself who lived through it, and then actually winning the European Cup. And the 3 players, and of course we're into the swinging 60s, we're into a totally new era for people. And these 3 players, their sheer existence has just outlived anything else. They achieved what everyone wanted to achieve, and they set the platform. The 3 Ballon d'Or in one team, still never been beaten. I saw the 3 debuts of all of them. I was there when Bobby played against Charlton Athletic. I was there when Dennis played against West Brom, and George against West Brom. And of the 3, whilst I met all 3, George I did know. I knew him quite well. I knew him from 16. Saw all his career, and then in later life had a renaissance with him on the after dinner circuit. And he was a year older than me. He was such a likable guy. Bobby was a carefree guy up till 1958, one of the lads, and it changed him. The crash definitely changed him. And Dennis was just explosive. I mean, just an absolutely magnificent footballer and a match winner. Those 3 players, Best, Law and Charlton, were there at the right time and achieved absolutely everything, which others after could equal but could never surpass.
Right, Pete, to finish it off, tell us what made the United Trinity so great.
Well, yes, having posed the question at the start and listening to what you lads said, I realised it's one of the hardest things to sum up. If you saw them, and you could bottle it, you'd know why this stood out. This stood out for so long as something so good. I mean, first of all, they were all great individual footballers. You've covered about Bestie with his dribbling, and Charlton with his shooting and body swerve, and Law with his reflex goal scoring. And for a guy who was 5'9", I think, Dennis Law, he could leap and hang in the air, look better than people that were 6'6". So brilliant footballers, born champions, born winners. Playing together, the 3 of them were in so many games, they were too much of a handful for any opposition. They also possessed a telepathic understanding. Busby allowed them to play off the cuff, unlike Revie and Howe and Ramsey at the time. And those three players could do it, as well as the other players that were in the side. But Best, Law and Charlton just knew their way to goal, almost as if they were hardwired to it. In the matches they played together, they started 293 United matches together, and they scored a total of 365 goals in those 293 matches together. One of the reasons I think why we have that statue is because we've not had, I don't think, three players playing in the same side that have played that many games and scored that many goals. You mentioned the Ballon d'Or winners, blimey. We keep saying it as if it's next to nothing. 3 Ballon d'Or winners in the same side over a 6-year period, unsurpassed. They were adored on the terraces. Law was idolised by the Stretford end as the king. And no disrespect to Eric Cantona, there has only been one king of the Stretford end, in my opinion. Georgie Best had a godlike following. The lads loved him, the ladies loved him, whether it's for his football or his looks. He had a real charisma. He arrived at the time of the Beatles, of the swinging 60s, as Roy said, of the youth culture where you had this mass following of home ends, and ours was one of the most vociferous of the lot. And we had Best, Law and Charlton, and we were so proud of it. We had so many songs about them. They had charisma, they had flair, they had daring do. The trio were United's top scorers in a number of seasons. Law managed it, I think, in 5 seasons. Charlton in 3 seasons. Best in 4 seasons. Again, we've had players that have come close to that, but not all in the same side at the same time. And that's key. Charlton's 249 goals are a club record that stood from, 1973, I think, till 2017. The 3 of them were in United's top 6 all-time record goal scorers. So again, 3 players in one team from United's 140-odd-year history in the top 6. 2 of them were in the top 3, even now, with Rooney overtaking Charlton. Georgie Best, you mentioned your heroes. Bestie, who kind of grew up with us as we started to watch the football, he just lit up my life. He lit up the life as a 10-year-old as I was, and then through my early teens and my later teens. And during that winter of 63-64, those games I watched him in the youth team were just something special. He bamboozled opponents. He had this captivating presence when he went on a football pitch, supremely confident but never arrogant. And he just weaved magic before your eyes. I witnessed his 6 goals at Northampton in 69-70 in the FA Cup. Only him and Harold Hals in 1911 been United players that have scored 6 in a match. So there you go, that's something special. Dennis Law was the fastest player to reach 100 goals in the fewest games. He only needed 110 matches to get 100 goals. Dennis Law was a goal machine with a bag full of tricks. In that season, when he got 46 goals, he scored 7 hat-tricks. 7 hat-tricks in one season. Imagine that. Nobody's come close to that. Bobby Charlton, who doesn't get as much glory, he has recently with his passing, but Law and Best had the sexiness of the 60s, the swinginess of the 60s. Bobby Charlton was just an absolutely brilliant player through the 50s and the 60s and the early 70s. World Cup winner with England, European Cup winner with United, 3 league titles with United, FA Cup winner, FA Youth Cup winner 3 times, European Footballer of the Year, runner-up twice in the Ballon d'Or, English Footballer of the Year, United record all-time goal scorer for 4 decades, a record appearance holder for, again, 4 decades, 20 years service as a United player, awarded the OBE, awarded the CBE, knighted by his country. And when you think all that, he did all that, and he survived a plane crash at the age of 20.
Well, that's terrific, lads. Thank you all for your thoughts about United's Trinity. And we hope you all enjoyed watching episode 20, the United Trinity 60 years on, as much as we enjoyed talking about it. If you want to watch some of our other episodes, then you can find us on Twitter at Warwick Road Walk. Until then, join us next time as we walk down the Warwick Road. Thank you, everybody.